Welcome to our discussion, Mind and Body, using DBT, and EMDR for healing and recovery. My name is Carrie Lynn. I'm a knowledge translator here at CIPCERT, and I would like to acknowledge the land on which CIPCERT is housed. So CIPCERT is at the University of Regina, which is located on Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories. The ancestral lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota nations, and the homeland of the Métis. So it's really with gratitude that we offer this land acknowledgement as part of the ongoing conversation towards reconciliation. So just some very quick housekeeping. Today's session is being recorded and it will be sent to you after the session at some point within the day or so. All attendees are in listen-only mode. That's really just to limit our background noise, and no cameras are on, so they're off by default. Please use the question box if you have any questions. We will monitor those and try to get to as many as possible. And this event is presented in English, but you will have the option of simultaneous captions or audio translation in French. We do this using Wordly, so we will post a link in the chat where you can access Wordly, our translation platform. Just be sure to select French in the top right corner, and then keep this window open throughout the whole talk today. So I'm very pleased to introduce our speakers. We had one cancellation, so we've got two with us today. Suzanne Aikens, she was born in Regina and raised in Barrie, Ontario. Suzanne is a seasoned psychotherapist and a member of the CRPO with 20 years of experience. She began her career with a diploma in child and youth work from George Brown College, followed by a degree in psychology from Laurentian University. Suzanne earned a Master of Arts in Counseling Psychology from Yorkville University and received her initial EMDR therapy training in 2014 and has since become an approved EMDR consultant and trainer. She works in private practice with Psychology Matters in Barrie, Ontario, as well as running her own EMDR training organization, EMDR Training Canada. She's passionate about helping individuals recover from trauma and aims to expand both the clinical and public knowledge of both trauma and dissociation. So welcome, Susan. And Dr. Andrew Ekblad is also here. He has over 20 years of clinical and research experience, in the treatment of borderline personality disorder through using DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy. He also has extensive experience in the application of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, and mindfulness-based therapies for trauma, mood, and anxiety disorders. He's certified is a certified clinician with the DBT Linehan Board of Certification. Broadleaf Health is one of 2 DBT LBC certified programs in Canada. Dr. Ekblad leads educational seminars, and workshops for hospitals, universities, and community mental health practitioners throughout Canada. He has presented original research at international conferences and published various academic articles on DBT, borderline personality disorder, emergency department care of suicidal patients, substance use, mindfulness and mentoring. The list goes on. He's registered with the College of Psychologists of Ontario and the Newfoundland and Labrador Psychology Board. He's an adjunct professor of psychiatry at McMaster University as well, and has received his PhD in clinical psychology from Duke University. And then also completed his pre-doctoral internship at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. So welcome. Very, very nice to have you both here with us today. Is there anything you wanted to say or contribute or add? If you do, please go ahead. And if not, we can jump into some questions.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
That's great, Carolyn.
Okay, excellent. So we will monitor, again, the question box. So if our audience members have anything to say, please use that. But we do have a few questions to start us off. So this is really open to either of you, but if we could start with sort of that foundation, what is trauma and what is dissociation in terms of what you both do?
If you want to go ahead, Suzanne.
Sure, yeah. So I think that this is part of what that intro was for me specifically, is expanding our understanding and how we use that word. I think that traditionally, historically, we've used that word in kind of a narrow way, being trauma. And Jamie Fisher, sorry, Jamie Marich did a great TED Talks, and she's a great writer in the EMDR world. And the Greek root word of trauma is wound. So I think that we can all relate to experiencing and having a wound that heals well when taken care of, and when not taken care of, takes longer to heal, can get infected, can get agitated. And so viewing trauma in this way and defining it from that perspective as being a wound of the brain, I think is a helpful, and it can lessen the overwhelm or the assumptions that we can make when we use that word. I think the other piece to it is that the body is oriented towards healing when provided with the environment. So the brain, same, is oriented towards healing when provided with the environment. So if we do have a wound on our arm and we attend to it and we nurture it and we put ointments on it and we take care of it, it most likely will heal, right? So when we provide the brain with the environment to heal, which we'll go into more detail with EMDR, then it has that capacity to heal. Yeah. Andrew?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. And to Suzanne's point, I think that there's kind of like an evolving understanding of how we think of trauma. And one distinction that I like to make, just kind of thinking about language, is sometimes distinguishing between trauma and stressors. I think that the language that we use about our experience affects our experience. And so when getting to know a client, I always like to think through what is traumatic, what might we think of as a psychological injury, and how might we distinguish that from stressors. And I always want to be careful to not pathologize the experience of stress. I think that stress needs to be thought of up to a certain point as a normal part of the human experience, and that yes, we could all benefit from having some ways of managing. And at the same time, I always, I want to unpack it a little bit. If someone says something like, I've had people say to me that it was traumatic to be, asked to do a pop quiz at school. And I've had people equate, kind of like doing a pop quiz or, like let's say some kind of food poisoning or a flu or something like that with, kind of like being in combat or the experiencing a sexual assault or something like that. And so I like to kind of distinguish between traumas and stressors. At a certain point, it might be difficult to draw a really, really fine line, but I do want to normalize the experience of stress in some ways in people's lives. And that doesn't mean that, it's not worth attending to. And at the same time, I think that having an idea of a range of severities when we think about trauma and stress is, I think that that's important. I know that there was also a question around dissociation. And, again, something that can be thought of in a number of different ways. I think that I would usually relate dissociation with an experience of feeling empty or numb in response to a situation that was so emotionally overwhelming or painful that it almost kind of like went off the scale of emotional experience. And I'm worried that I'm going to say something and someone's going to correct me on it, but I was told by a physician one time that the most severe burns are burns where there's no experience of pain. And I thought that that might be a useful parallel for what dissociation is, that there's this experience of intensely painful emotion that gets more and more and more intense. And then at a certain point, there's this experience of numbness that can set in when it's just sort of like it's gone past the person's ability to experience or tolerate that emotion.
Yeah. The piece that I like to add is, so if we think about our survival responses that we're all born with, right? Fight, flight, freeze, accommodate, flop, fawn, fawn and flop, or fawn being kind of less familiar, but that's when you really want to accommodate somebody that you feel like is upsetting or intimidating you. But a lot of us are familiar with fight, flight, freeze responses of our nervous system. And so just like Andrew said, when those are overtaxed, we can fly out of our window of tolerance. There's a phrase that we use called the window of tolerance, which is if we are within this window, we are tolerating our environment well, and we are emotionally regulated. When we go up into hyperarousal or hypoarousal, those are forms of a dissociative outside of our window, right? So it can be shut down and flop, right? Or it can be activation like vigilance, so either one of those can be a form, and really to normalize that we all do dissociate. Everybody is going to have a minor level of dissociation today as they're listening because something might pop into their head and they didn't hear what any one of us, me or Andrew, said. And so that's a form of not being in your present self, right? And so the opposite of, let's say, mindfulness would be a dissociative state, dissociation. But then, of course, just like we're talking about trauma as a spectrum from stress all the way to PTSD or complex PTSD, dissociation as well is on a spectrum. Yeah.
Yes. Suzanne, pardon me.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to repeat the name of the person whose TED Talk you mentioned? We just have a couple of questions asking who that was.
Yeah. So that was Jamie Merich, M-E-R-I-C-H. She actually is great. She talks about dissociation and she talks about addiction and she talks about trauma. And she's very forthcoming with her own process in that. And she's written a number of books on that. I was going to actually add on to Andrew's statement, which was Brene Brown, who talks about being hardwired for stress, right? So when we are provided with the environment of supports and we are strained, stressed, that's where we talk about preventative care, which we hopefully will talk about in a bit, then our bodies are hardwired for that. Avoidance actually can breed the anxiety and the dysregulation, but our bodies are designed, in that way.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you guys both for this introduction to trauma and dissociation. I think it will be something that definitely resonates with people. Yeah, absolutely. Especially those who experience traumatic events or, potentially psychologically traumatic events, which is what, our PSP, our public safety personnel do experience. Okay, so if we jump to the next question here, let's maybe talk about, what is EMDR therapy and how does it differ, from other therapies in terms of helping, our public safety personnel?
Yeah, for sure. So EMDR works with how memories are stored. So when you think about, again, those survival responses, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop, when that happens, there's a cascade of hormones and chemicals that are going off in our body. And that memory, that situation does not get stored in our brain in the same way as if you are at the dinner table talking about your day with your family or with a partner. It's not autobiographical, it's traumatic. And what that means is that if you don't have the support following that situation, and there's not the space and time to process what happened in that situation, then that situation, that memory, can get stored in your brain in a state-specific form, meaning that whatever was happening in your body and your mind during that time of the event, if at any point you are activated or triggered, like there is a reminder, a time, a place, a person, a smell, a color, a season, then that memory can get triggered, that intrusive memory, or some people experience flashbacks, and your body will experience it in that same state-specific form. So your heart might race, your thoughts might race, your palms may sweat. And so it is stuck. It's like a circle in a square. And so EMDR is specific to assist the brain, provide the environment for that memory to integrate into your autobiographical memory. And so the best way to explain EMDR is likening it to REM sleep. So if you think about somebody in REM sleep, they're in the deepest part of sleep, and if you were to watch them, which might be a little bit creepy, but if you were to watch them as they're sleeping, their eyes would be rapidly moving back and forth. And what's speculated to be happening is that the eyes are stimulating each hemisphere of the brain, bilateral stimulation, and integrating the day's events, dumping what you don't need to remember, like what you had for breakfast or the route you took to work, right? And integrating that information. And so we engage in that same process just in waking life. So eye movement desensitization, right? So originally this therapy in the 80s was developed by quite literally following the therapist's hand as the individual had in their mind an image of the event that they were having difficulty with in integrating and processing. But now we have tones, so people can wear headphones that go do, 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 or pulsars that people can hold, all been researched, all work well. And so as the individual, we help, of course, the therapist assists with setting up what the target is, what the memory is. We isolate that into a moment. We set that up with some cognitions, and then we do the bilateral movement to help the brain to digest the information. So it's a phased-based therapy, which just means there's certain things that we do kind of first, second, and third in order to prepare somebody for that type of activation, because as you could imagine, it could be pretty difficult or very difficult to go there if you didn't have the resources set up for you beforehand. But the biggest component of EMDR is that it's about the memory. It's not about the symptoms. The symptoms are what brought you in, and the symptoms will inform us around what your body is remembering that has yet to be digested. But we will go back to the memory to digest that, and the symptoms take care of themselves, which is a beautiful organic process that we take witness to. So if you think about EMDR, it's about memories and the difficulty of when you are activated in a fight, flight, freeze response, the difficulty that your body has in integrating that information, if not provided with the environment to do so. And so EMDR helps to target those specific memories to help the body and the brain digest the information. So no longer is intrusive. It's no longer like that circle in a square in your brain, and it becomes truly your autobiographical memory. So you are remembering it instead of reliving it if it gets triggered or recalled. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And hot off the end of EMDR, Dr. Ekblad, if you could please then maybe go into, what is DBT therapy? How do we do this? How do we use it?
Sure. So dialectical behavior therapy was originally developed to work with people who are struggling with what we would call emotion dysregulation. So emotion dysregulation, the experience of intense and quickly shifting emotions. We know from genetics research that some people come into the world more prone to emotion dysregulation. So while most people experience the same emotions, not necessarily in the same situation, but the same kinds, everybody's been happy, everybody's been sad, everybody's been afraid, etc. There's actually a wide range of intensity in terms of the intensity with which people experience their emotions. So DBT was designed to respond to people who experience a really intense reaction and are slow to come back to emotional baseline. And oftentimes people who experience this emotion dysregulation, it might be following a trauma, or it might be a predisposition that's there from birth. Oftentimes people who experience this emotion dysregulation can resort to managing the emotion dysregulation by being impulsive. So common impulsive actions related to emotion dysregulation might be, there are many, but some common ones might be angry outbursts, substance abuse, impulsive eating, sometimes risky spending, impulsive sex, and then self-harm and suicide attempts. So DBT assumes that these difficulties in emotion and behavior can be managed by learning skills for how to manage emotion, behavior, and then also relationships. So in dialectical behavior therapy, it's a skill-based therapy where it is, there's some different components. One component in the way that it's originally designed is somebody goes to a group that is very much kind of like a class where they're learning and practicing skills every week. So skills related again to managing emotion, managing behavior, improving relationships. And then they're also going to individual appointments where they're tracking tracking different goals that they might have. So they might have goals related to eliminating angry outbursts, or goals related to eliminating self-harm, or limiting suicide attempts, or increasing healthy eating, increasing whatever, balanced exercise. And so we track these goals on a weekly basis, and we, teach our clients skills for how to, kind of improve their progress on these goals, especially by using DBT skills. So there's DBT as it was originally designed, and then dialectical behavior therapy has also been adapted in different ways. And I definitely think that while there are some PSP who can benefit from comprehensive DBT, which is the skills group and the individual with the goal tracking and other components as well. I also think that there can be times and places when, depending on the emotion dysregulation and the impulsive behavior that the person is experiencing, somebody might weave dialectical behavior therapy skills into psychotherapy that might not be embedded in the comprehensive framework. So another way of putting that would be, I know that a lot of psychotherapists will maybe teach some DBT skills occasionally as part of their work with PSP or with other clients, even if they're not working in a setting that includes the structured group and individual psychotherapy and things like that. But most of the research is on DBT as it is offered in the kind of group and individual packaging.
Yeah, more structured kind of weeks, set up like a week, like 13-week program or something like that, or
Well, so DBT as it was originally designed is 24 weeks.
Okay.
So 24 weeks, you go to group and individual for those 24 weeks. You also do 4 weeks of what we call pre-treatment.
Right.
So assessment, orientation, and commitment. As it was originally researched, people did the 24 weeks and then they repeated the 24 weeks because practice makes perfect. So oftentimes it was 1 year. There's been some more recent research that says that there are benefits to more of like a 6-month protocol, which would be doing the 24 skills one time instead of twice.
Right. Nice. I was gonna just add there too, for EMDR, when how I was mentioning the window of tolerance earlier and hyper and hypo. When we think about PSP and the types of events and that they're regularly exposed to, as you are exposed to more and more stressful events, your system can get overtaxed, right? And if we don't necessarily have the supports in place, then what can happen is that your window of tolerance can actually shrink. That's where individuals can have a startle response when, somebody opens their door and they're not looking in that direction. Or your partner can say, I just called your name like 5 times. How come you didn't hear me? Right? So your capacity to tolerate your environments because of what PSP are exposed to can shrink. And so at times, what sometimes brings individuals into therapy isn't what they would maybe say as their worst experience as a public service personnel, because it's just the accumulation and that final event that saying that the last straw kind of situation ends up bringing them into therapy. So my understanding of DBT, I have some training in that too, that I do in the early stages of EMDR, is to expand what you can tolerate. to know that you can sit with distress and you won't, some individuals use that word CRAZY, or won't go, crazy or anything like that, right? So you can tolerate it. The other thing that we work on in therapy and EMDR is tolerating positive affect tolerance. And some people think that's strange. They're like, what, I can't laugh, or I can't experience joy, or, and that feels like a contradiction. But at times your body is registering it not as safe. I actually need to be in a vigilant state, in a vigilant place in order to scan my environment and know that I'm safe. So laughter and joy, that takes a level of ease, a level of comfortability, a level of vulnerability, right? So those are the two things that we're working on in the initial stages of EMDR before we go into targeting the specific memories that we gather when we do your history. The other piece with EMDR that is important for people, and even when I work with public service personnel, is that I will do an attachment history to understand the foundation in which this person is standing, right? It's really important to understand the soil and the roots in which you were raised, because there's tons of beautiful research on attachment theory, and we have a great understanding of those 0 to 5, 0 to 10 years, and how that impacts later coping. So that's the other piece of EMDR is that we go back into the attachment to understand that, as well as working on, of course, the distress and the traumatic material that they come in with from work.
And so in thinking about, early years and this window of tolerance and how we kind of evolve and the things we experience in terms of these, how do we increase that window of tolerance? And I think you kind of touched on it a little bit. Is that something that we can do? And are there, techniques that maybe people could employ to actually, to help themselves?
Absolutely. Yeah. Andrew, did you want to jump in, or?
So increasing the window of tolerance related to early developmental stressors, is that kind of the question?
No, sorry. Or just generally, I mean, say somebody's working right now, as a public safety personnel, and they're feeling these things we're talking about, or you guys are talking about, how, and they go, oh yeah, that window of tolerance is this, and I'm kind of over here, or I'm under here, how can I increase or maybe expand that window of tolerance if possible?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the questions related to what skills can I be using? What skills can we encourage PSP to be using either on the job in very difficult situations, or, kind of like outside the job? It's interesting because I actually think about this a lot. Like, what can a public safety personnel worker do in the middle of a very dangerous and stressful situation? I mean, what comes to mind for me is actually pretty simple, pretty basic. I don't mean simple and basic to be bad. I just mean it's relatively uncomplicated. Now, there's things that are uncomplicated that are also very difficult. The example that I use with that is a marathon. A marathon is incredibly uncomplicated. It's putting one foot in front of another, but it's also incredibly difficult because you've got to do so much of it. I would say that in the middle of difficult situations, skills like progressive muscle relaxation, and deep breathing. So certainly one thing that we will focus on is making sure that clients know that it's not so much about deep breathing, that deep breathing is fine, but that the most impactful piece of deep breathing is a long, slow exhalation. I think that when distress is very high and someone needs what I would call discrete skills, so discrete meaning maybe you need to do something and you need other people to not know you're doing it. If you're, for instance, sitting in a stressful meeting or something like that. Progressive, or what is sometimes called paired muscle relaxation, or some breathing that focuses definitely on a long, slow exhalation. Those are some things that come to mind. In terms of expanding the window of tolerance, I mean, I think that part of it is around education and making sure that I find that a lot of times the first responders that I work with come in and they're like, nothing particularly bad. Like, I haven't had a capital T trauma. And there's a couple of things that come to mind when they say that. Like one is, well, I wonder if you're minimizing some of your stressful experiences. And then another thing is just sort of recognizing, to Suzanne's point, the cumulative impact of a number of difficulties, and that, it might be that the most difficult thing that happens to someone has a delayed impact, and that delay could be months or years. Or it might be that it's not kind of like the worst thing, but an accumulation of a number of different things. And so I think oftentimes one of the biggest challenges that people are facing is their idea of how they should be feeling. And I oftentimes tell people who are struggling with trauma is like, there's really the only thing that you could do wrong is tell yourself that you need to be feeling a certain way. Everything else we can probably work with, but telling yourself that you should have a certain reaction is inevitably going to lead to more distress, more judgment, and an inability to tolerate difficult emotions that are coming up.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, agreed. I think when we talk about the window of tolerance, and there's a term called functional disconnection and functional reconnection. That comes out of the BOSS program, which is called Before Operational Stress. It's a great program that we are trained in here as clinicians, and that we do with our fire, police, and paramedics here in town. And what functional disconnection really means is that it is healthy and okay for you to turn down your empathy when you go down to work, when you go to work, right? In order for me and myself to not bring every story home with me, there's a certain level of turning down the empathy. What does that mean for me when I go to work? It means that I work hard at being mindful and to be clear with myself that this isn't the person sitting across from me, my sister, my mom, my father, my child, right? So there's a level of disconnection that is healthy to engage in. And I turn down my empathy ever so slightly. We tend to be kind of good at that. The piece that's a little bit harder is the functional reconnection, which is when I leave work, how do I reconnect to myself as a woman, as a mother, as a wife, as a sister, as a daughter? And so that transition from my work, from my office to my, life after this is important. So is that music? Is that an action? We talk a lot about taking your uniform off at work, right? Is there something really tangible that I do? If you have a lanyard, leave it somewhere, put it in the car. Something really tangible to let your nervous system, let your body know that I'm no longer on. That's the hardest piece, is how do I turn this off, right? So have some sort of transition, some sort of ceremonial, some sort of statement that you engage with to specifically remind your brain that you're moving and you're transitioning. So expanding your window of tolerance. The first piece, like Andrew is mentioning, is around the psychoeducation of what does my body feel like when regulated. I think there can be confusion between calm and numb. Do I know the difference between calm and numb? That's an important conversation to have, right? Do I know the difference between vigilance and excitement? That's an important conversation to have, right? PSP, you individuals are trained to go against that fight flight response that we have. I will run away from fire, right? Or I will run away from a dangerous situation. So your training is important, so you can drop into your training when those situations happen, but you're trained to disregard that, drop into your skills, and do what you need to do. So part of this is around, how do I disengage from that? What is the practice of that reintegration into getting and going home to the family or my partner or whatever that looks like, when I have been trained to respond to situations in such a certain way. So part of it is the psychoeducation around mapping out your system, which means, what does my body feel like in these different states, specifically to you? Another resource is Deb Dana. Deb Dana has adapted Porges' very thick and dense information on polyvagal theory. The polyvagus nerve is the largest nerve in our system. And regulating that is what's regulating your window of tolerance. So humming, singing can regulate your window of tolerance. Cold plunges at the end of a shower can regulate. Remember, with the cold plunge, you want to breathe through it as opposed to catching your breath, right? So the intention is to breathe into your body and slow it down with that cold plunge. Walking is a bilateral exercise to engage with. So speaking about the window of tolerance again, I'm going to repeat myself, but that's okay. When you're in a hypervigilant state, you actually want to slow things down. So using tools in mindfulness are going to help you. When you're in a shutdown state, you actually want to get the body moving, because in a shutdown state, the body believes that I should not move because it is for my survival to stay still, right? So you actually want to move the body to get it into a regulated state. So this is where I say that first we want to map out our system. What do I feel like in anxiety or in shutdown? And then what do I want to rely on when I'm in either of those places, right? To start to get into that capacity to tolerate a broader range of emotions. So looking at resources online, connecting with Deb Dana has a ton of great videos online, and she's got an entire book of tools in regards to helping to regulate your nervous system. But as I was saying with EMDR and the eye movements, there's a great app called Anxiety Release based on EMDR. It's a one-time fee. There's no kickback for me, but I suggest it for everybody. I have it for myself. But it has the bilateral tones to help regulate the system when you're feeling anxious. And again, what that's doing is integrating, activating the left and the right side of the body to calm the nervous system and to orientate the nervous system to kind of a benign action being the walking, or benign sound being the tones. I hope I'm being clear. So please ask questions if that isn't. But there's many, many, many different things for regulating tools, but those are a few.
Thank you. That's wonderful. In thinking about what you were both saying, I think about how saying I should feel this way, I should do this, that can sometimes lead to feelings of guilt as well. So when you think you're maybe, talking positively or thinking positively within yourself, it actually can then beget more emotion that might be, negative or unwanted, just throughout those feelings of guilt of I should feel this way, but I don't. And really that reminder of it being okay to feel is also sometimes the first step for some folks, right? It's I'm feeling this, what do I do about it? Maybe you don't know, but you've recognized it, and that can be the first step, which is really great. So thank you both for that. We've got a question here. We've got a few coming in, so I'm just gonna pop to the chat here. So regarding DBT or EMDR, if it's related here, does this approach or do these approaches, do they differ for clients who might have ADHD and PTSD? So if either of you can speak to that.
So yeah, I mean, dialectical behavior therapy, you might think of it as a specialized kind of cognitive behavior therapy. By specialized, I don't mean better. I just mean that both dialectical behavior therapy and cognitive behavior therapy, they have certain assumptions. They assume things like our thoughts affect our mood and our emotions and our behavior. Okay, so these are pretty broad concepts. But I would think about, when I think about DBT for ADHD, the first thing that I want to know is, has this person been through a course of CBT for ADHD would be my first thought. And have they been through a medication trial? Just because that's oftentimes recommended for people with ADHD. It doesn't mean that it's a good fit for everybody. And I'm not a psychiatrist, so I'm not going to say that that's the right thing to do. But if somebody came to me and said, well, I'd like to do DBT for ADHD, I'd say like, okay, that could be a good fit. Let me look at your treatment history. And I would hope that there'd at least been some discussion of CBT or meds. And then, kind of see, well, what helped, what didn't help from those angles. And then if it was sort of like this person has done a couple of trials where they've got ADHD, but then they've got co-occurring other difficulties, then, absolutely somebody with ADHD can definitely benefit from dialectical behavior therapy. Somebody suffering from ADHD, DBT wouldn't be like my kind of like first go-to treatment. And at the same time, can the skills related to emotion, behavior, relationships be helpful for people with ADHD? Absolutely. There's a set of mindfulness skills. A lot of times mindfulness and relaxation kind of get conflated, sometimes to a problematic degree in from my perspective. Mindfulness is really fundamentally about attention. And so, attention is obviously one of the core deficits in ADHD. And so I definitely think that somebody suffering from ADHD and other difficulties can benefit from DBT, even though that's not what DBT was originally designed to treat.
Mhm. Yeah, so with EMDR, there's not necessarily anything that would be different about the treatment. Definitely worked with individuals with experiences of trauma, ADHD, and formal diagnosis of PTSD. We know that in the PSP world, the correlation between individuals working in that field and ADHD is relatively high. And so it is something that we work with regularly. It would be specific to the symptoms coming in that would be of interest to me. No matter the diagnosis that walks through my door, my interest is the symptoms and the individual and what is pressing for them, because that's the unique features that we're going to focus on and work on. But absolutely, individuals that, if we think about relying on the environment to soothe us and or to regulate us, so whether that be through a symptom, a pattern, a behavior. So if it is an addiction, not that ADHD is an addiction, but if there is an external difficulty with regulating the system and the environment, in EMDR, we're going to work at focusing on what resources do I have internally. It's a lot about working through, it's called installing internal resources to help expand the tolerance with whatever symptoms are causing the most difficulty in their day-to-day life. And then, reaching on Gabor Mate, who's a great speaker of this topic as well. He does relate some early life attachment breaks to ADHD type symptoms. So I would also be interested in that, doing your history and understanding you in that entirety from your soil to your roots, to work through that more comprehensive kind of full treatment plan.
Thank you. Okay, great. So, Dr. Ekblad, can you recommend any comprehensive training, maybe offerings for DBT? One of our audience members has mentioned there's a lot of online training that might be maybe watered down or maybe not evidence-based.
I love this question.
Did you write it? No.
One of the things that has happened in dialectical behavior therapy in the last, let's say 10, 15 years or something like that, is that there's been this significant dissemination of the therapy, which is really cool and really exciting. One of the challenges that has come with that dissemination is that oftentimes it's disseminated in ways that are inconsistent with how the therapy was designed. And usually people are interested in it because it's been shown to work for some difficulties. And then sometimes it gets disseminated in a way that might not be as effective. So people want to do it because they think it works, but then they do it in a way that's less likely to work, which is problematic. So, people within the DBT community understand that it can sometimes be difficult to implement a combination of the group and the individual appointments, and sometimes it can be implemented, sometimes it can't be. One thing that we'll sometimes talk about is the difference between adopting and adapting. So adopting is saying, I understand what the model is and I'm going to adopt that model. Adapting it is, I understand what the model is, but because of my setting or whatever else, I'm going to take some pieces, but I'm not going to be able to take on the entire model. I think it's really, 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 really important to know the background and credentials of the people who are training you to do the thing. And this is why we took it at Broadleaf. We took it as a kind of ethical responsibility to go through the Linehan certification, because we feel a responsibility to make sure that our clients are getting what they're being told they're getting. Oftentimes when people are told they're getting DBT, they're getting well, I wasn't going to use the term watered down, but because the person asked the question uses that term, that might be inappropriate. way of thinking about it. There's a few different options. So for people in the GTA, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health runs a really good training program that occurs over a number of weeks. It's a combination of, kind of like class type setting, didactics, but then also going and observing the therapy being provided, whether or not that's in a group or in a DBT consultation team. So CAMH's got a good one. There is a good online training called PsychWire that has, or sorry, it's through the PsychWire organization. So PsychWire is a site that provides a lot of online training. But Marsha Linehan, who created dialectical behavior therapy, she leads a number of those. I think they're pretty solid. So I recommend that people check out PsychWire. I also feel really strongly that that having some practice and some feedback is really valuable. So, we're broadly, if we're constantly working with trainees, and sometimes like half of our team is trainees. So if people wanted more of a training experience, we lead, both the didactic part of the training, like here's the knowledge related to the training that you need. But then we'll allow people to come and observe the work that we're doing, participate in the work that we're doing, receive consultation on the work that we're doing. So it's a few different options. I think the PsychWire can be a good way of learning a bit if you're outside the GTA, even if you're in the GTA, obviously. But then also we are frequently hosting a lot of trainees, and a number of our trainees have gone on to have this certification again because we think that people should be doing what they say they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. That's great. Yeah, that's wonderful. Suzanne, if I could just ask you, the author of the book that you had mentioned for regulating the nervous system, we just have
Deb Dana.
Deb Dana.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. I'm just gonna type it into the chat, I think. Okay. Okay, that's great. So if we can maybe go and circle back to the window of tolerance, we've got a question about it. How can we address the idea that accepting being out of your own window of tolerance is maybe not inherently part of our culture? So the idea that we have to take action to be quote unquote normal is not something that is taught or accepted in certain workplaces. So they've given examples of EMS and fire. And they've also said that there can be resistance to engaging in the behaviors to regulate after a shift.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, I think that that's a challenge, extreme challenge. And, we talk a lot here at the clinic how we are at the forefront of something that we're witnessing as change. I think just to prelude, my response to that would be advocacy to your chiefs or to your commands or to whatever that looks like, because we now here have a contract with Barrie Fire, Barrie Police, and Barrie Paramedics where they have us on hand regularly for debriefs, post calls, and for work well assessments, which they have every year by choice if they want to monitor the mental health. So, that took 4 or 5 years, slow progression because of the culture. So I think that I have heard a lot of individuals talk about that resistance and that challenge and that difficulty. I think peer support teams are essential and have a great impact on change. I think as much as you can come in and talk to a clinician, yeah, absolutely, sure, I can give you skills, but I do think advocating, and hopefully you have a peer support team. We offer trainings here that are called the clinically informed peer support team. So it's just to, provide the peers that are going to provide that to their comrades, the information that they feel that they can speak to with more confidence. So I think advocating for that. And I think acceptance of being out of your window, the hard part about the culture is that there is an idea or an understanding that there's a separateness from being human in some regards. And that's where the culture has precipitated that. And I think the fact that you asking that question are sitting here and being curious about that, I hope for you that you have somebody else that you can say, hey, like that call went off. And what did you think about it? How did you feel during that? One thing that Brene Brown says is that every act of vulnerability takes courage. We have associated in culture vulnerability being weak. And it does feel like an animal belly up vulnerability, like you feel pretty raw and pretty open. But every act of vulnerability, not every, I don't want to be absolute here, but acts of vulnerability can take a great amount of courage. And so I think saying that to somebody close to you, or saying that that call isn't landing well, that call isn't sitting well, how about you? How are you doing? You know, can be that form of breaking through the culture that's trying to deny something that most likely everybody in that room is experiencing or has experienced to one degree or another. Yeah, that's where I start with that. Andrew, I'm not sure where your brain was going.
So, just so I understand, Carolyn, is it kind of like what if is another way of putting it like what if the culture is not accepting of acknowledging that there might be an emotional impact from the job and the fact that it might take effort to manage any emotional impact from the job? Is that kind of one way of thinking about the question?
Yeah, they kind of start off by asking or saying, how can we address this idea that acceptance of being out of that window of tolerance is not inherently part of our culture? Does that help?
Okay. Acceptance, the idea is not inherently okay. So I think I think I'm following. I
Like
mean,
man up? Is that what maybe what it's feeling like?
sort of like that the culture is suck it up, buttercup,
Yeah.
and so we're not tolerating. Okay. I mean, it, yeah, I've got like a traffic jam of thoughts in my head.
Mhm.
So first, I would validate, yes, historically, there is this culture in first responder cultures that this sort of like again, suck it up, buttercup. I heard that from the first time I heard that phrase was from police officers, and knowing that that was kind of the message of like we're professionals. Sometimes hard things are part of the job. Too bad, keep going. So historically, yes, that is a big part of the culture. I can absolutely validate that. I would also say that my experience, um, I've only been working with police officers for 10 years. And in those 10 years, there's been a lot of change in the culture. And I think that that change in the culture around mental health, and wellness, sometimes these words are feel imperfect, but I think the culture and conversation around those things has changed a lot. And I know that a lot of the services that I work with will kind of like front and center be telling people, when they're hired, it's a good idea to connect with a mental health professional, even if you're not struggling. The same way that we would say it's a good idea to connect with a dentist or a GP. You don't go make your first appointment with a dentist when your teeth start falling out. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and so I really do. I think. I think that efforts around stigma reduction, so that challenges related to mental health within the first responder culture, I think that those efforts are having an impact. I think that there's more acceptance within the culture now than there was 10, definitely 20 or 30 years ago. The other thing that I would say is, if somebody came to me and they're like, well, it's not okay to be struggling or anything like that. I think, uh, you know, there's another thought that I have that comes to mind is that there are many services will have, sometimes 10, 20% of employees off work on stress leave. Like that's a shocking number in terms of how high these rates are at times. And so it's in terms of like the impact on the public, in terms of the emotional suffering that those people are experiencing. And so if someone is saying, well, we should avoid this stuff or we should ignore this stuff, I'd say, good luck. Like that's not happening. It is having an impact. There's not, we're choosing between it having an impact and it not. What we've got to choose between is it has an impact and we don't address it, or it has an impact and we address it. I think it's more progressive to say, there are impacts of these jobs on mental health and we need to address it. So we need to put it out there. Um, and then the other thing, and something that I feel more and more passionate about over time, I actually have one of the most, like without exaggeration, professionally impactful experiences of my life over the weekend, which was attending the second annual Ontario Police Suicide Memorial. So I'm on the board of a group called Beyond the Blue, and I'm on part of the organizing committee for the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial. And what it is right now is the reading of names of officers in Ontario who have been confirmed as died by suicide and been put forward by the family and the service. And it was incredibly powerful, and definitely something that I left walking away from thinking how how unpersuaded I am by the idea that we can get away with acting like these jobs don't affect people's mental health. And I'm happy to, in very blunt terms, speak to any first responder group about we don't have the luxury of acting like this stuff doesn't affect you. It is affecting you. We could talk about it. We could try to make some progress on it, or we could ignore it and cross our fingers at our own peril. And I feel very, very strongly about that, because the consequences of acting like these challenges don't come with the job. The consequences are potentially lethal.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
not really,
And
but I feel very strongly about it.
yeah, agreed. Yeah. I think too that there can be such a separation between what an organization intends and what boots on the ground are feeling, right? Like I think that there's a
100%.
yeah, there's a lot of political motivation, which can sound wonderful, and that the individuals that are doing the work aren't receiving those messages and aren't receiving that support, right? I think that there's a huge discrepancy between those. I think back to circle to the question around acceptance, I think I would encourage to go internal to work towards your own acceptance of what it means to be out of your window, what it means to be dysregulated, whether that work can be done on your own or with somebody that you trust, and working towards, I think it's a DBT term, Andrew, which is radical acceptance. There's also a book on radical acceptance. There's a book called Radical Acceptance and then Radical Self-Acceptance. And I don't know the author, but I don't think there's many books called that.
The author of Radical Acceptance is Tara Brach. And
Thank you.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I would say find your roots, find your stance, find your steady. And then when you feel like you have that capacity to use that language, it's going to come out in a different way and reverberate through the culture in a different way. But this is an ongoing project, and I don't want to minimize that there's work that has been already done, and then there's a load of work. I was about to swear, but there's a load of work that still needs to happen, right? And I think this is a testament to this conversation right now, and the people showing up is a testament to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, leadership buy-in and things like that, those all contribute to this, and, feeling supported in the workplace, and that if you need time off or, help in any way, that it's there for you, and that it doesn't actually affect your job when you come back to it and things like that. It's all very relevant, very important for our first responders.
I want to emphasize a point that Suzanne made, well, and you're making as well, Caroline, about the role of leadership and the kind of organizational betrayal that can sometimes happen when leaders are sort of saying one thing but doing another. And so I think that, one thing that I've become more and more passionate about over time, and always appreciate opportunities to talk to service leadership about trauma-informed leadership, which starts with recognizing that there are psychologically traumatic experiences that not only might happen with the job, but that do happen, and leaders need to know that those experiences might be affecting someone's performance, somebody's life at home, and that there need to be policies related to mental health, related to wellness. But within those policies, there also needs to be a consideration of the person and a look at the impact on the person, so that there aren't, to Suzanne's point, well-intentioned policies that end up inadvertently looking nice, but then maybe contributing to an experience by the employee of being actually unsupported.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Laura Secretson, who's the psychologist here that owns this clinic, runs those groups as well to clinically inform the leaders. So it's a separate course from the peer support course, to inform them on what individuals are experiencing and how to support them when they come to you, or they one of the traumas that we talk about is sanctuary trauma, which is you turn to somebody that you think is going to support you and they don't. Right? Or moral trauma. This isn't supposed to happen. Those feel a little bit more tricky, right? Those can be targeted with EMDR therapy, but those ones can sink deep. And oftentimes you can process through the scene calls, but then the moral and the sanctuary trauma can linger, right? Those can have roots in your history too, just because our leaders can represent attachment figures. But yeah, absolutely, having clinically informed leaders is essential as well.
I can't tell if you're looking at the questions or if you are just so on point, Suzanne, but we do have a question about attachment history. So the question actually is, do you do a full trauma history or timeline as part of this attachment history with PSPs? And what do you use to guide the attachment history?
Yeah, so just as somebody was asking about DBT training, so I'm an EMDRIA approved trainer. So EMDRIA is the governing body out of the States that approves EMDR trainings. And there's a certain skeleton of expectations that training needs to address. One of the unique features that our training does is the attachment history. So every EMDR therapist is going to gather your history, but what they may ask is something in regards to, tell me your 10 worsts. Tell me your 10 worst memories. Tell me your 10 at best. And then they also may ask a little bit about the attachment or your early life upbringing. So what we tend to do differently in the individuals that I train is, one, we do a genogram, which is just a family tree, essentially. So I get to know all the kind of playing parts in your life. And then I start at intergenerational, so pre-birth information around your parents, Gabor Mate and Bruce Lipton, all these individuals that memories can be stored at a cellular level. I want to know about your parents. And then we ask about 0 to 18, year by year, as much as you remember. And I created an attachment script for trainees to guide that kind of interview, I guess you could say. Now individuals, it can take, let's say, somebody that has a great recall. I don't have great recall, but somebody that has great historical recall of their life, that could take 4 to 6 sessions. So that does, in the grand scheme of things, feel like a lot sometimes to people. However, in EMDR, I'm going to work with an individual and talk to them about the psychoed around starting with the memories from earlier in their life, even if they're a first responder, because those are the foundation. Neural networks in our brain, they store memories together. And so it's like a stack of pancakes. And if I try to work on this memory, but it's at the top of a stack of pancakes and I'm ignoring the memory from 5 years old, that can have an impact on how smooth the therapy goes. So I do a full attachment history. I work with the individual where they're at, of course, and their what they would like to experience and see between sessions, so what skills they may need. So as we're gathering the history, we're talking about the window of tolerance. We're talking about regulation tools. We're doing EMDR specific grounding tools. But yes, we do an attachment history, and we ask about all those early memories that could be impacting how you talk to yourself, how you think about yourself, and how you treat yourself when you're struggling.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of where the DBT piece would come in here. I mean, even though DBT is built around trying to address problems that are occurring currently, you can't, what's happening right now does not happen in a vacuum. The best predictor of the future is the past. That doesn't mean the past controls the future, of course. I wouldn't want to be a therapist if I knew what was always going to happen next for somebody. And at the same time, the past is always having an influence on what's occurring right now. I was meeting with somebody, and I knew that they'd had a recently traumatic event. And the first appointment, I touched on it pretty glancingly. And they were like, we sure did talk a lot about what happened before, whatever, a few weeks ago. And I said, yeah, like we need to talk about what happened a few weeks ago. But if an asteroid hits a lake, I know an asteroid has hit a lake, and I know that that's a big deal. And I know the person wants to address the asteroid hitting the lake. But a really big factor here is the lake. So is it dry? Is it ice? How big is it? Have other asteroids hit it? And so are there houses around it that are going to get damaged? And so I need to know what is going on for this person before life's difficulties are hitting it, or I need to know the historical life difficulties before I'm looking at the more recent as well. So, definitely a developmental and attachment history is what in DBT we would call a precursor to treatment. So we have a pre-treatment phase of assessing someone's difficulties, orienting them to treatment, with the idea being we're not even going to get going until we're clear on what's going on here. So yeah, essential.
Thank you. Okay, that's great. Let me just check our chat box here. We've got somebody asking, going back to functional disconnection and reconnection, and they're asking if you have any insight into sort of the reverse of those things. The example they've given is such as social work requires showing significant empathy and managing of those emotions. Leaving work, there's an exhaustion of empathy or those caring emotions. And is there anything to help with that?
Yeah. So the empath survival guide, I think it's called. Again, I don't have an author for that, but it's a book. Agreed. So it's around boundaries are a buzzword and they're used a lot. But Nicole LaPera wrote a book called How to Do the Work. And she has a whole chapter, which, I'm sure there's many books on boundaries, but the one thing that I like about her book is it's clinician and client friendly. And after every chapter, she has a series of questions to get into the nitty gritty of how that chapter is affecting your life. And one of them is boundaries. Cheryl Richardson's The Art of Extreme Self-Care is another great resource because she looks at boundaries and self-care in a broad term. Self-care is not getting your toenails done or going for a massage or getting in that run that you've been wanting to get in. It's in small incremental moments. And these things, self-care, acts of self-love, boundaries, can protect our superpower of empathy, right? Because it is a beautiful superpower, but when it's not protected, it can be overtaxed, right? And our desire to work with individuals and to be our best and to help them to be theirs, we can definitely overinvest in, right? Many of us have been in the place of working harder than the individual across from us. And so it's important to know what it means to have your own boundaries and to have that integral relationship with yourself, to follow through with, if your goal in a certain week is to drink more water, and I know this sounds silly, but we dismiss ourselves a lot. So I think it's in the small moments of, how do I protect my resource, right? This is a beautiful resource. And so how do I protect that resource at home, between home and and at work, with friends, with colleagues, with partner, with kids, right? So I would say diving into boundaries, I would say diving into where you see yourself overtaxing your empathy, right? And I will tell you that my vicarious trauma, which is a term out there, which is taking home and absorbing other people's trauma and having trauma-like symptoms from it, has definitely gone down, near disappeared with EMDR. And the reason is because it works for one, right? And it's structured, which is super helpful for individuals that feel like they are nervous or anxious about coming into therapy. And so I think having a modality behind you that you, one, I've done my own EMDR therapy, so I walk the walk. I will never say anything in my room that I have not asked myself to do or done myself. And having a modality that definitely works for the individuals across from me is important. But I would say that, how do I protect my resource, the boundaries, and how am I overtaxing this empathy? So that I then have the awareness of how do I turn it down, which is saying no and having limits and, with your schedule and all those kinds of things. I hope that I answered that question. If there's a follow-up piece to that, and Andrew can add to that if he likes.
Yeah, if that brings up any thoughts for you, Andrew, please go ahead.
I mean, I think that in terms of with the kind of, there's a lot of pieces there, but one thing you were saying there, Suzanne, goes back to another theme that we've come back to several times, which is this idea of normalizing people's emotional reactions to things. I think it's also, and this is, I think, kind of what you're talking about, Suzanne, it's also important to normalize the need to either seek treatment or at least put effort into living well. I think that too often people might come to us thinking, I should just feel well. And there's something wrong with me for struggling with X, Y, Z difficult thing that's going on. And so I think my reaction would be, it makes sense that you're struggling with this or that thing going on, probably because our brains weren't evolved to being exposed to this or that. So I think normalizing that, and certainly from a DBT and skills-based perspective, we are, any DBT therapist is constantly talking about the DBT skills that they're using. The extent to which they go into self-disclosure about their own life, that might vary. But the idea of normalizing life impacts us and learning ways to manage those impacts. And that happens to everyone. It happens to PSP, it happens to PSP families, it happens to non-PSP, it happens to, therapists, is a really important part of things as well.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let me look here. So we've got about 15 minutes left in our talk. I'd like to maybe take a look at a bigger picture item for folks who are here. In terms of each of these therapies, what does a realistic timeline look like for somebody who's kind of just beginning one of the either or? You can each speak to this, to really start seeing kind of relief or change, especially if they're in these environments of ongoing crises and traumatic events.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for EMDR, what research suggests is 8 to 15 sessions. The precursor to that is if there isn't a significant continuous attachment trauma in the early life. So if it is complex PTSD, or if there is significant attachment wounds in their early life, then you would be looking at longer term therapy. But I've worked with many individuals that we could be in session 6, targeting your first traumatic memory. With EMDR, your symptoms may go up for a week or 2 before they come back down. As you could imagine, one of our first coping tools is avoidance as humans. So as you attend to what's happening, sometimes it can feel a little bit more intense. But the research says around 8 to 15. I see more realistically like 12 to 22 kind of thing, just in the pace of life and how, you know, I'm not going to be a drill sergeant in regards to if you've experienced a significant loss and you come into session, I'm not going to be like, nope, we're going back to EMDR and we got to stick with it, right? No, we're going to work with what's in the room. So it can take a little bit longer. But I think individuals are relatively surprised when they're given the information and the tools, and they have that motivation. How once they start integrating it between sessions, I do say to people, this is 1 hour out of 186 in your week, right? So that you're meeting with me. So how much time do you want to commit to this every day? You know, to start setting that structure for yourself. And when that happens, individuals can start seeing that type of relief within that time frame that I mentioned.
Yeah, with dialectical behavior therapy, I mean, there's research on DBT having a positive impact on a range of different experiences. And this might sound odd, but I feel like I should say it. Dialectical behavior therapy is not a treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. So I would consider DBT trauma informed, meaning DBT understands that trauma might have an impact on people's lives. But in contrast to EMDR, cognitive processing therapy, prolonged exposure therapy, those are interventions that are designed to treat. There's a lot of research that says that they are effective at treating post-traumatic stress disorder and other difficulties as well. And Suzanne, you can correct me on my language there if you want, but I would say that you're going to see most of the bang for your buck with DBT around some of the difficulties with emotion dysregulation and kind of chaotic behavior. Difficulties that are sometimes associated with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And then in terms of like, when are we going to see results? It would really depend on what are we looking at. I mean, I think a lot of people are attracted to DBT because there's a lot of good research that shows that it's effective and effective relatively quickly in responding to really dangerous behaviors like self-harm and suicide attempts. I mean, if I'm going to do 6 months of DBT with somebody, I'm hoping that I'm going to see an impact on reductions in self-harm and suicide attempts within, you know, the first 1 to 2 months, which I think is pretty fast if somebody's been struggling with those difficulties for more than a decade. Other difficulties, whether they be related to, you know, substance abuse, angry outbursts, am I, you know, do I think it's reasonable to expect changes relatively early on? Yes. Is that always a linear path? Unfortunately, no. But I would hope that within the first 1 to 2 months, that the person that I'm working with, and this is one of the reasons that we have them track their emotions and behaviors while they're in the treatment, and we can look at those every week, is that we're seeing movement on their priorities that they have set related to you know, a healthier ability to manage and regulate intense and quickly shifting emotions and chaotic behavior. So again, we're tracking it. We're making that person's treatment kind of like evidence-based and individualized way. And you know, dialectical behavior therapy, and sometimes responding to pretty severe things. One way that we'll sometimes talk about it is you're moving forward, or you're moving backward, or you're standing still. And if you're standing still, you're moving backward. When psychotherapy is not always that linear, and at the same time working with very high risk behaviors at times leads us to be pretty focused on, are we seeing an impact here? Are we seeing it again within the first 1 to 2 months? And if not, why not? Because we don't want to mess around if someone is coming to us with some more severe difficulties.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes me really think about when you track those emotions, people may go through their life and they experience things, what, you know, traumatic events, and experience emotions and things like that. But actually, you know, putting it on paper, so to speak, and saying those things out loud to somebody else can really make quite a difference. Like, you know, maybe you've experienced it, but you've never actually noticed. So, yeah, very interesting. Okay, so as we wrap up, I would love to ask from you know, DBT and EMDR therapies, if you could kind of pull one tool from your toolkit for PSP to use, and you can give it some thought. I know this is a new question here, but what would that be? What would you think, in terms of crises or in terms of just great emotional distress? What is something somebody could do in that moment?
Wow, big question.
I know, I know. Give it a minute to think about it, and
Yeah,
I can give it a shot.
go
Um,
ahead.
because I know that there was a question about, kind of like early career and preventative skill learning as well. I think the work of Dr. Nicholas Carlton there at Regina and associated with SIPCERT is just awesome, awesome. I think that one of the things that his research really emphasizes is the need to be learning and practicing skills. The research is, based in part on the unified protocol for psychotherapy that borrows from different cognitive behavior therapies and dialectical behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. And I think it's such powerful research that speaks to the value of early career learning how to effectively manage emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. And within that, we have an early career skill training program at Broadleaf. And one of the things that we do, and one of the things that I know that his research emphasizes, is an emphasis on what, from a DBT perspective, we might call mindfulness of emotion. And it's really just sort of like developing an awareness of emotional experiences. We can't try to address our experience if we're not able to name it and label it and put it into language. And so learning how to identify, this is how sadness feels in the body, or how anger might feel in the body, or these are the thoughts associated with these things. That awareness of one's emotional experience is such a fundamental basis for building a healthy emotional life, that's one that I always really emphasize, and it's also something that kind of harkens back to the question around making discussion of mental health and wellness part of the PSP culture.
Mhm.
Telling ourselves that we're not feeling a certain way isn't helping us manage how we're feeling. And if it was, we wouldn't be going to things like the Ontario Police Suicide Memorial. It would be fine to tell yourself that you're not feeling anything. You would just be not feeling it, and then everything would be fine. But oftentimes, it's the people who are dying because they're saying, I'm not feeling something. So giving oneself permission to say, this is how I'm feeling, is just a crucial, again, foundational kind of door opening type of skill. Um, to then create more opportunities to build a healthier emotional life.
Yeah, for you, your family, your colleagues, right? Everybody, that ripple effect. Sorry, Suzanne, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, yeah, agreed completely. I think one thing that I would, as a lasting remark around that question, would be to validate that you have more capacity than you think you do. And I think we dismiss a lot of our strengths. And I think that bilateral exercises, bilateral activity is inherently grounding. What does bilateral mean? It's just the left and the right side of the body. So one tool that you can take away as an immediate something that you can start integrating is any actions like throwing a ball, like a sport, some sort of sport, going for a walk, even sometimes doing house chores based on their cross-body actions. Based on the left and the right moving in different spaces, right? This is, the early integration of the left and the right brain when a baby is crawling, right? So that type of action, that type of movement with your body helps to regulate the system and helps to integrate information. So like I said, that app called EMDR, anxiety release based on EMDR, that app is just that. It's a selection of 4 exercises that are guided. One of them's 10 minutes, pretty easy at times to integrate 10 minutes into your life, where it has you focus on something upsetting in your body as it does the bilateral. So things like that you can start integrating right away. I would say that would be my go-to. Bilateral exercises. You could quite literally Google bilateral exercises to help get your brain kind of exercising and expanding in what that means.
Great. Thank you so much. If anyone has any final thoughts, concluding thoughts, anything you'd like to say, now's your chance. Or if not, we will wrap up.
Yeah, I don't think so. Not for me.
Okay.
I appreciate the time. And
Yeah,
then are folks going to have our contact information? Or I won't speak for Suzanne, but I'm happy for
Yeah,
people
absolutely.
how to get a
Yeah.
hold of me if they want to.
Yeah, so we can definitely make that available. They don't have it right now, but what I'll do after is reach out to you all and we can get your contact information out to our folks who attended today. And Suzanne, I might ask, you had mentioned a lot of authors and books and TED Talks and things. So if I can, I'll email you separately and maybe we can get that information and I can send that to everybody that's attended today as well, because there was, quite a few questions about that in our chats and our questions and everything. So
sure.
yeah. Great. Yeah, we've got lots of thank yous and things coming in. So thank you. Yeah, from me. And it's been wonderful. This has been really great. I've wanted to host something like this for a long time. So I'm very grateful to you for being a part of it and sharing your knowledge and expertise. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Thanks for having us be part of it.
Thank you. All right. I'll stop sharing and I'll close everything. So it will close quite abruptly. But
all right.
just so you know.
Okay, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.